my name is Jordan.
And I'm Zach, and this is our Universal Intervention Plan for Planning for Diversity of Learners.
So we're going to focus on two of the 5 components of Tier 1 intervention.
The first one being establishing and maintaining expectations for behavior with rules and procedures.
And the second is creating a physical setting that supports academic and social goals.
So this is the optimal layout for our plan. We have it split up into small, close-knit groups of students that all work with each other. And it's designed to promote community and social setting where students are still getting the academic value, but they have the input from each other, they can discuss things, and they can build acclimated friendships because they're all working together.
So here we have created the optimal place for students that need to be separated from their classmates. It is right near the teacher's desk, and it still is in close proximity to groups, but students will be secluded if this is something that is needed.
Alright, so here we have our little group table set up, and our idea for this was having these students in a close-knit group would be a really good way to keep them productive and make a good social environment for them. But it also has a nice behavior benefit where all of these students will form like a little social group and they'll all help each other. But if one student is underperforming, the other students can come in and help him, and there's a group effort to support maybe students that are a little behind or students that don't quite understand the material. And it really keeps the teacher need for punishment or reward down because the group itself is acting as a social influence. Nobody wants to seem like the wink link at the table, so the teacher doesn't need to punish or overly reward students for doing the right thing or the wrong thing. The group itself will automatically correct that.
So in this classroom layout, we have created a circle that is ideal for class discussions and class interactions. We have it laid out so that the teacher can easily walk through the circle and look at what each student is working on and what each student is doing. And if needed, the teacher can step out and can address all of the students at once.
Alright, so here we've rearranged the groups into more of a traditional classroom sense. So the nice thing about these groups, especially with tables like these, is that you can rearrange them to whatever kind of group system you need. We still have our single occupancy table over there to the side. And this just makes a more classic and traditional approach if you need to do a direct, teacher to student, all around classroom direction.
On Robert Marzano's research website, through his book Designing Effective Classroom Management, there's a free reproducible that has a checklist for classroom layout. So we're going to assess our classroom that we have created. High traffic areas free of congestion. This would include the door, the trash can, the bookshelf that we have emulated back here. So we have done that in our classroom. Can all students be seen by the teacher? If the teacher is standing at the front of the classroom, here at the desk, she or he can see all of the students at one time. Frequently used materials are easily accessible. Here our bookshelf is open and easily accessed by all students. Check. Can all students see presentations? As we have our computers here that are going to be able to present what is needed, all students from each desk should be able to see that. So this semester I have had the opportunity to observe in 2 different classrooms, and although the class size is very different, some classes were as small as 7 to 8 students, while the largest class at the other school has 33 students in it. The teacher layout of the classroom that I've been able to observe has really created 2 different totally classroom atmospheres. So yes, I do understand that the first school that I attended, the class sizes were a lot smaller, but the teacher had desks paired together, and so students were always sitting right next to a student, and they were not in rows, they were in little segments, and so the students were they were all facing the front, they were all looking towards the board, and they were able to sit by a partner. And then in the second placement, the teacher, yes, does have 33 students in her class, but her desks are all in straight rows, and there's little to no interaction between students. This is just something that I've been able to observe, and I wish that the teacher in the second placement was able to have her students work together more, because I feel like that is something that has been very useful for those students. And if I have the opportunity to, this was something that I would really like to implement in my classroom. I think that having students work in small groups is a great way to promote social interaction as well as to facilitate learning among students.
One way to get students enthusiastic about their classroom is to create a space for them to create themselves. So here we have 4 bulletin boards that will be transformed by each class, assuming that you are on a block schedule. So we have done an example here, and this is just a place for each class to display whatever they want. It's their area and their chance to shine.
And it also helps a lot for behavior and rule systems, especially with having students involved in it and being very enthusiastic but not negative about enforcing them, because part of your requirement for the bulletin board is you could have the students write the rules so that all of them are focused on it and they know what the rules are, but they're having fun with it and they see that you're serious about them, but you're not going to be overly negative and harsh on them and just make it an overall unpleasant experience.
Yes, so students can help design their rules on the very first day of school, and then they'll have a place to post them themselves after they have helped you come up with them.
All right, so a lot of our material that we use to make parts of this plan, specifically the class layout and how we interact with students, comes from this book by Harry and Rosemary Wong. It's got a lot of great ideas in here, and this was our primary research tool that we use to kind of set up a lot of our strategies and our classroom management.
Right, so as far as procedures and rules in the classroom, students need to feel that someone is in control and that there's a safe space for learning, and this creates a caring environment when students feel this way. So this is something that the Wongs talked about in their book. So we should make sure that students know that the teacher is in control, and this is why we have rules and procedures in place. When students feel safe in their learning environment, they are able to learn better and more.
And it's really important to have that clarity, and when you want to make yourself seem authoritative figure, to be very specific about what your rules are and make sure that all your students understand them. So that was our use for our bulletin board, because it's fun and artistic, but it also clarifies to each student this is exactly what is expected of them in a manner that's fun. But it really makes it clear to each and individual student, because they have to write the rules out themselves, that there are no real exceptions and that there are expectations for each and every individual student.
So another resource we use is Carol Weinstein's book. It is called Middle and Secondary Classroom Management, Lessons from Research and Practice, and it offers a lot of good insight for classroom management. One guidelines that she gave was how to plan classroom rules. And she says that rules should be reasonable and necessary, they need to be clear and understandable, they should be consistent with instructional goals and with what we know about how people learn. And lastly, that classroom rules should be consistent with our school rules. When we're creating these rules, we need to make sure our students understand that rules have reason and purpose behind them. When students understand that your rule that they must be in class on time is because you don't want them to miss material, not only does this show your enthusiasm for your subject area, but it helps them understand that rules are not simply put in place as a punishment, but instead as a way for them to stay on task and a way for them to be successful. And this also is a big part. Students should know your enthusiasm and your passion for your content area and your subject that you're teaching, because they will have more respect for you as a teacher and an instructor when they see that you are passionate about what you're teaching them.
This is something I have a lot of personal experience with. It is the reason I became a teacher. When I was in high school, I had a very influential geometry teacher who had all kinds of random rules that had no real explanations. You would be punished for things, for doing things right, for doing them wrong, and she didn't really have a whole lot of passion behind what she was doing. She would just stand up, she would read a couple pages from the book, and then yell at you if you asked questions. And it was really kind of shocking to me that there was teachers like that. And I started tutoring some of the kids in my class afterwards, and I discovered that I really enjoyed it. So this is something that I have a personal reflective area on, because it is the sole reason I'm here today. I've done a lot of things here with how the classroom is set up and decorations and getting students to do the bulletin boards and really having the student focus on designing a social and educational environment for them. But it's important to consider when you set things up like this, there's a number of societal factors that come into play that could be considered inappropriate or insensitive to some students, like culture. You're going to have students from all kinds of various backgrounds. You could have students that come from a very heavy religious home, or students that come from a very different national area. So it's important to stay away from hot topics like politics and religious practices in your environment because it could alienate students that don't prescribe to that particular type. And another big section to focus on would be poverty.
Yes, so Carol Weinstein in her book, going back to it, she offers 4 ways to help students that are poor. First, she says we should provide basic survival assistance. We should be sensitive when disciplining. We should encourage academic achievement. And we should provide special help for students who are frequently changing schools. This is a way to just ensure that these students who are coming from homes that are high in poverty, that they are able to succeed and they're just as likely to succeed as your students who have supportive backgrounds.
Doing a project like this, it's important to consider that having a lot of good ideas can always have negative counterparts. So it's always important to not just accept things blindly as perfect, because nothing ever will be. And that's especially true with events like these little groups that we have here, where all the students are in close-knit groups together, because they can be beneficial.
Yes.
And they can be negative.
Yes, so I think that groups can be a good way for students to interact with one another. As Zach talked about earlier, they can keep the students on track, in line, and the social interaction will keep students responsible for their actions and responsible for their participation.
And from my perspective, at least playing devil's advocate here, it's important to consider that getting a bunch of kids in a group together, sometimes they'll fight, sometimes they'll talk too much, maybe a couple of them force another one out of the group. Kids can be relatively mean to each other every now and then. So it is a thing to keep an eye out for, is that in these groups that there's not any kind of tension or fighting going on in between the students.
Yes, and I think one way to be proactive about this is to not let students choose their own groups, to place the students in groups, whether you do that based off of skill level or personality type. And this will take some getting used to. It will take time for you as the teacher to learn your students and to see who needs to work together. And this is also why we showed you several different classroom layouts, because not all classrooms will work with a layout where all students are in groups all the time. So another idea that we found during this project that we really like, but we're not really sure if it will work in a classroom, is the idea of letting each class create a bulletin board. So we thought that this would be a good way to get students involved in the classroom design, but we're not sure if this would actually be successful if we implemented it.
I think the biggest flaw that I've seen with the bulletin board design is specifically boys will be a little more immature with their writings and their drawings on the board. They could put swear words on it, or just inappropriate imagery. And it's just something that is very common with that age group, especially as in middle school and a high school level.
Yes, so this is something that you as a teacher would have to gauge whether or not you think your students would be able to handle this type of freedom and type of... Another thing that we were a little unsure about in Carol Weinstein's book, when she offers guidelines for dealing with students who live in poverty, she says to be sensitive when disciplining. And one example of that she gave is to not penalize students who are asleep in class without talking to them first, because she suggests that they might not have a bed or a quiet place to sleep, and this could affect the way that they perform at school.
Now, once again, that's a thing that you have to be very careful with, because while it is true that some students may have less sleep outside of the school environment, they are still sleeping in class. And if you were to just allow students to get off for doing that, students could walk all over you. There are limits. You could have a student that is perfectly fine at home, he's got a nice environment, and he sleeps in class because he just doesn't want to be there. And you still need to discipline him. You should consider maybe as a bad home environment, but not everybody will. And if you were to just let everybody get away with whatever they wanted, you wouldn't have your authoritative presence as a teacher. All right, so that was our plan. We focused a lot on building the environment and on the rules that guide all the students, and we hope you enjoyed watching it.